There were four main routes mapped out that led to freedom. North along the Mississippi and Ohio rivers, west along the Gulf into Mexico, south into Florida, where fugitives sought refuge with the Seminole Indians, and along the eastern seaboard into Canada. To throw off slave catchers and bounty hunters who were on their trail, fugitive slaves used paths that zigzagged and doubled back. Although routes were carefully guarded secrets, they were passed along to those still enslaved in the South in a number of ingenious ways.
Maps of the Underground Railroad were smuggled into the South and relayed by several other methods, such as word of mouth, storytelling, and through song. Coded directions were contained within the contents of newspapers, letters, and other bulletins. Quilts made by slave seamstresses on the plantation also bore escape information.
Using quilts in the 19th century as a means of conveying messages was traditional to the American culture. Women used quilts as their way of expressing themselves. It was a billboard and cloth, if you will, for many in the 19th century. So therefore, for the African American community, for the enslaved Africans, to use the quilt as a means of communication was not as alien as some might think. The patterns were there as mnemonic devices. That is to say, the quilt patterns were there to trigger the memory of those who saw them. Apparently what was done was a sampler quilt of some kind was used to teach the code to those who were about to escape. The patterns and their meaning were individually memorized so that the escaping slaves could then take with them mentally a map. Quilts were hung on the fence, one quilt at a time, a total number of 10 quilts. The first quilt contained only the monkey wrench pattern. That was an indication for the people to gather whatever tools they needed for this journey. Once that quilt came down, the next quilt that went up was the pattern wagon wheel. This was to alert the slave community to put together whatever materials they would need to put into a wagon, things that one would take on a journey. And then the quilts went in sequence down until finally what was shown was the tumbling blocks. That pattern was to indicate the time had arrived. You were to box up, pack up, and leave. The map was in their head. People make the mistake of assuming that those who were brought here from Africa came without culture, without knowledge, without a wealth of information. And they're very wrong, because the people who came over brought with them their culture, centuries of knowledge of the stars, of growing crops, of doing many things, and above all, the use of mathematics. Mathematics are necessary. Mathematics is essential if you're going to create these quilt patterns. We're working in geometry.